Dan Rubenstein, you and I are recording this episode with 1 week until the last game of the season, and we thought there's no time like the present. It's been a long time since we did this. Let's dip into that deep well of baller questions. Let's do a Q&A episode here in mid-January, my friend. Welcome back. How goes it?
It's great, Ty. I went to the Bulls game yesterday. I don't know if you've ever been to a Chicago Bulls game. It's a great time. Very handsome play-by-play announcer. Obviously, our dear old friend, Adam Amin. Life is great, Ty. It's 4 degrees here or something ridiculous, but doing this episode with questions and therefore content supplied by our smartest, most courageous listeners.
That's right.
It keeps me warm these cold months, Ty.
It absolutely does. We got great questions here from all across the Verballerhood. We put out a prompt on every platform we could think to do so. We have more questions here than we know what to do with. If we have any overflow, maybe we'll throw that out on Patreon. But let's see how this goes first and foremost. We had so many Verballers. I get the sense who just had questions that were built up, just waiting to be released out into the wild. We're going to do our best over the next 45 minutes or so to go through as many of these as we possibly can. Don't forget to go on out to playbowlbingo.com. That is the URL. We've got one more bingo card left to play. Yes, there are going to be a bunch of options with respect to the upcoming national championship game. Again, that's being played a week from today. We're recording this on Monday. January the 20th is when you can find that game. We have our full preview coming up a little bit later on this week. So stay tuned as well for that. And of course, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of our episodes. Should we dive in, Dan Rubenstein?
Let's.
Congratulations, Skippy. You've got mail.
You've got mail on the Solid Verbal.
Dan, as often as we can, we like to pay homage to the wonderful Verballers, who take the time out of their busy days to send questions in to us. Why don't we start first, though, with one out on Patreon? And this is a popular question that Tim sends in.
This is verballers.com?
This is verballers.com, yes.
Good call. Okay. Hey, real quick, it'd be great if you could consider subscribing to the YouTube channel down below. It really helps us out.
Will we look back on the era of SEC dominance in a similar way to the steroid era of Major League Baseball? Of course, the records and wins will stand.
Yeah.
But there was rampant cheating by many SEC teams. Now that the field has been somewhat leveled by NIL and transfers, we see the advantage of the SEC, and it's disappeared. I think it's starting to color my perception of that era. If Georgia and Bama had continued to crush teams after NIL took hold, that would have disproved this theory, and I would concede that it does just mean more, but so far that hasn't been the case. I love that we've got a little bit of Tim speaking with his chest here, Dan.
That's true.
The era of SEC dominance is over, comparing it to the steroid era of Major League Baseball. Don't know if I fully agree with that, but alas, a lot of people are talking about this right now. What do you think?
Okay. I don't know who Tim roots for. I don't know if you know who Tim roots for.
I do not.
But if the implication is that teams like Ohio State, Michigan, Notre Dame, Oregon, USC, teams who've had a good amount of success outside Florida State, Clemson, you name it, Penn State, teams who have had a lot of success, but not quite on the level of the consistent success of the top of the SEC, are not, quote unquote, cheating. I don't know that if I were a fan of any one of those programs, if I would welcome an audit of every single 5-star committed to that program, along with their families and trainers and high school coaches and 501c3s of their 7-on-7 coaches. I'm not sure that they're fully prepared for a lack of cheating or whatever you want to call it within those places. So no, I don't buy. I mean, I know it was like the Shane Gillis joke with Nick Saban. He's a Notre Dame fan thinking it's, an equal playing field now that everybody can pay their players. You don't want the audit. You don't want the audit of those upper level blue chip players committed to those places. So I don't believe that the playing field is even. I think that there is more money at those places flowing into the programs as a whole. The "it just means more" thing does have a little bit of truth in that. It just means more because we have more donors who care about donating for new facilities or an expansion of the stadium or making, or a buyout of a coach who's not working out, that otherwise perhaps in another conference would get another year or two, even though it was clear that they were never going to succeed and fulfill the promise of their hiring, or that they're spending money on whatever that makes a program seem more big time. It's a more big time place to visit LSU than it is to visit Illinois. That's just a fact. There's more money there, there's more talent there, and there's more energy around that program's football team and program than there is for Illinois football. And that's okay, because Illinois has had good seasons and they're a good program. But it goes so much further to me than, we had a situation, or we had a program in place to make sure our players and payers, I guess, were all accommodated. And so that somebody with market value was being paid under the table, I don't equate that at all to somebody injecting a banned substance to be a little bit stronger and hit more home runs. I don't have a huge problem with the steroid era either, by the way. But no, I think it's a lot of wish casting from people hoping. And I think there's truth to the SEC dominance being a little bit different in coming years because of depth issues, and the portal, I think, probably affects things more than NIL, which obviously those two things are tied. But I don't see that as like an apples to apples comparison. How about you?
I don't know if we know yet. If we know yet. I mean, part of what made this season so unique is we had so much change hitting at once. Now, transfer portal, NIL stuff, that's been building for a couple of years running now. I don't know if we still know the full effects of what those two in tandem are going to do to college football. We just don't. I mean, we have an assumption at this point. We follow it closely. We talk about it every day. I think we have a pretty good sense for where the sport is heading and how these two things in tandem are affecting it. But I think we're still sort of incomplete on that. And I don't know if this season is proof positive that the SEC's dominance is gone. Like, again, we've just had so much hit at once. The playoff expanding, I think that's going to have some effect on college football as a whole. Maybe which teams are willing to go out there and spend some NIL money to try and bring in transfers, to try and bolster their rosters, build depth, right? As we're seeing throughout the course of this tournament, depth is something that is very much of concern. But also, like Nick Saban walking away, I don't think we can underscore quite enough how big of an impact that may have had in the SEC. It did sort of turn things on its ear. Not the least of which was Alabama wasn't as good, wasn't as dominant as they have been, as Kalen DeBoer tries to find his way in Tuscaloosa. But you also had the instance of some Alabama players looking around, right? It's open season for those players if they want to go elsewhere. So it strikes me as just one of those oddball years where the SEC had a lot of good teams, very, very good teams, none of which are playing in the national championship, I would add, which I would expect is going to drive some folks in SEC territory a bit nutso. But my sense is I'd like to give it another year or two, and let's see how this thing shakes out. I think it's an exciting stance to take that the SEC dominance is over if you root for a team that isn't in the SEC. I just don't know if that's actually the case, because I still think the SEC was probably top to bottom the best conference in college football. This is not an argument that more teams should have gotten in the playoff. Like, I'm not going there with it, but I think top to bottom, still, in my opinion, the best conference, the toughest conference to navigate. So it's good. It's not like we have seen the talent level decline in any steep way. We just had a lot of teams that all kind of felt the same this year. And if that continues, then there's probably some validity to this. Maybe not with that metaphor of comparing it to the steroid era. I don't know if I buy that, but in terms of the quote unquote dominance being over, I would just like a little bit more data before I jump to that conclusion.
Well, also the term SEC is doing a lot of work when it was actually mostly Nick Saban doing the work to build up the term SEC dominance, that he had a level of sustained success with Alabama that gave cover to a lot of, like, you have, the one-offs or the two-offs like LSU, obviously Georgia now, and Kirby Smart have done their own work to bring that term SEC dominance to the forefront. And honestly, we're also talking about like an SEC dip that coincides with Georgia's quarterback not playing in their biggest game of the season. Does it mean they're beating Notre Dame? Absolutely doesn't.
No.
It's important context.
Sure.
It's important context to say that the starting quarterback for the SEC champion this year didn't play in the playoff. Like, you don't know what can happen with Georgia this year with Carson Beck against Notre Dame in that situation. But I don't think it's fair to look at this year and say, like, yeah, of course. Ole Miss was pretty good. Lane Kiffin has taken how many teams to the playoff in 4-team or 12-team fashion? That'd be zero teams. Like, Shane Beamer has taken 0 teams. Like, all of these, SEC teams that are, part of this conversation this year. It's not like Ole Miss has been doing a ton in January in years past, right? It's not like South Carolina has been doing a ton. We're just sort of using the retirement of Nick Saban as a sort of referendum or jumping off point to say something broader about the SEC. And it's still the region of the country that has Florida and Georgia and Texas to draw from talent-wise. So they're just going to be more advantaged moving forward in terms of roster building and the ability to pay coaches and build out a program financially. So absolutely not do I believe that the playing field is leveled in any sort of significant situation. You have adding Oregon and maybe USC and Washington to the Big Ten makes it more interesting for the Big Ten's depth. But I don't know. As long as Michigan is now spending once again, I guess, behind the scenes, and Ohio State is always going to be a big national player, I think we're in for 2 huge conferences and some combination of, an ACC up year, a Big 12 up year. But I would still, like, if I had to say which conference in the next 10 years is going to be the clear best, I'm going to say the SEC is going to have the most.
I would still probably go with that. And I would also say that another one of your points is true in that I do think the transfer portal and NIL, I mean, I think you'd be an idiot to say otherwise. It has leveled the playing field a little bit.
It's thinned depth out for sure.
Thinned out depth, which we're seeing now as we get into the deeper stages of this tournament. I mean, look at the Notre Dame side. They've obviously taken on a bunch of losses, and depth is really, really important. So if nothing more, we're learning something that we've known for a long time about college football. It's that the better teams have the most depth, and that's definitely going to be at a premium, especially if you plan on getting into the college football playoff tournament. However, this is not to say that the transfer portal and NIL has unleashed this era of parity. I don't think we're at the point of parity, but it has given us a tick more parity, just a tick more. We're not the NFL,
right?
But just a tick more parity has definitely made things interesting. As for whether or not that will continue, I think that's my whole point. I don't know. It worked this year. This year was interesting, but we'll see if it continues. Should we move on?
Yeah, no, the depth thing is interesting much more from the SEC not being able to, like, teams like Alabama or in some years LSU or obviously Georgia, your third best inside linebacker being able to sit for 2 or 3 years and wait as a 5-star. Those days are done. Like, and just only take, meager snaps here and there to get, in garbage time. I just think that's going to be the difference moving forward, that an injury becomes a little bit more catastrophic if it's a left guard, a safety, whatever. The ability to stack and retain talent at major SEC places, I think that era is 100% done. In the spirit of that question, the dominance of SEC roster management is absolutely over.
Let's kind of go to a related point. This one came to us from Alan.
Yeah.
What do you think the future is for college freshmen as starting quarterbacks? With the Blue Bloods, will the Blue Bloods still trust blue chippers as redshirt or true freshmen to take over, or will they have to find time elsewhere, join via the transfer portal / free agency? I find the quarterback pipelines more fascinating than ever. Yeah, I mean, it's the position that everybody talks about.
Yeah.
First and foremost, whenever you bring up a portal conversation. I took it upon myself to send this question to our good friend Brandon Huffman.
Oh.
To get his take on this, because...
Side text
indeed. I had an inkling as for how I wanted to answer this. I suspect you did as well.
Sure.
I just wanted to get Brandon to confirm it. So I didn't give him my opinion. I just said, we got this question. What do you think?
Yeah.
What do you think the future is? Will colleges trust true freshman, etc. He says, I think it'll be rare. Maybe down the stretch if a season is lost. He mentions DeMond Williams, which we saw at Washington.
Sure.
But I think it's going to be less and less likely. Redshirt freshmen will definitely have more chances than true freshmen, I think. That was his commentary.
Yeah.
I tend to agree. I think we are going to a point now where, with rare exception, if you were a true freshman quarterback, you should take your visits and you should decide that you want to go to the place that you think, at least in the short term, can develop you the most. I would almost treat it as you're going to have 2 recruitments. Unless I understand that like everybody's confident in their abilities, but the truth of the matter is right now with where college football is at, a big time true freshman should go into this expecting that there could be another transfer on the horizon.
Right.
So keep your options open. Don't burn any bridges through your recruitment. Go to the place in year 1 that you think can develop you the most, get exposure to the best coaches that, you can get access to.
Lines, receivers. Yeah.
Just get as much high level experience as you can and then kind of play it from there. I guess the other approach is to go to a place, maybe not at the top echelon of college football, where you're going to be able to get some real meaningful game experience. And if a transfer comes your way to try and go somewhere bigger and better, then you kind of take that a little bit down the line. But
right.
I agree with Brandon. I just think it's the game has changed, and the market for a true freshman to come in there day one and play is probably somewhat diminished given what we're seeing with the transfer portal. Now, the caveat is a situation like a Bryce Underwood at Michigan, where maybe he isn't the day one starter because they did go out and try to bring in some help.
Right.
I don't know if Mikey Keene is going to be long for a starting position, even if he wins it in Ann Arbor, just because Bryce Underwood looks like he is the real deal. But that's the only circumstance that I could see being almost a slam dunk that the true freshman's going to come in, where if the talent is so off the charts and if the skill set is so ridiculous that you cannot afford to not play this kid,
right,
those chances are those situations, I should say, are few and far between.
Well, look, it's honesty in recruitment that you're upfront with quarterbacks saying that your preference is that you're not going to start a true freshman, but you're going to put him in the best possible position to develop and eventually have the ability to earn the starting job at a certain point. You're right about looking at, also depth charts are important. It's not just who the coach is, it's what the situation is. Like, did they take a 5-star the year before who looks like he's can't miss and that you're going to be sitting for a while? It's also from the coach's perspective, it's risk mitigation. We both root for teams that the last 2 years, or the last 2 starting quarterbacks, in my case, Oregon started Bo Nix for 2 years. They looked at their current quarterback room and said, we need somebody that appears to have a higher floor. That maybe the ceiling isn't enormous, but we know they're not going to be a disaster. And that's what you don't know about a freshman or somebody who's redshirting or whatever that's in your quarterback room. You don't know how they're going to respond to a live game and a live defense, whereas you do know what Sam Hartman looks like. You do know what Riley Leonard looks like. You do know what Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel look like, guys like that. So we personally have experience with this, that Notre Dame looked at CJ Carr and said, he's not ready as a freshman, right? Oregon looked at Dante Moore coming into the portal and said, you know what? He was probably thrust into it a little bit too soon at UCLA. He could use a year to learn a system and get ready to be a star college football player. And I think that's part of it too, that coaches are, maybe not in the case of Marcus Freeman and Dan Lanning, they're worried about their jobs. Yeah. And starting an unproven quarterback could absolutely cost them their job. And starting somebody who was successful at Texas Tech or Minnesota or NC State or wherever, you can talk yourself into they're not going to be great, but we're getting to at least 8 wins and that's going to keep me employed. Right. And so there's a certain amount of calculus involved with coaches and offensive coordinators that's I see what they were able to do at this previous place. I feel like we're in a better situation that we can build on that and be a successful team instead of starting from square one. So the future of freshman quarterbacks is, to me, pretty dicey. It's, if you want to get good, you got to play in games. If you want to play in games, you got to go somewhere that like has no other choice. Like Oregon just lost a blue chip freshman already from this class who was committed to Cal, went to Oregon, has now back at Cal, transferred back to Cal. Cal loses Mendoza, and it looks like this dude with new quality offensive coaches and Brian Harsin and Nick Rolovich for Cal should have the opportunity to very early on play for Cal and prove himself. Does that mean he's at Cal for the next 3-4 years? Certainly not. We'll see. But it's really difficult when, Mario Cristobal at Miami has the luxury of saying, well, let's take a look at the market. Let's see how we feel about Mendoza or Quinn Ewers or now Carson Beck. And we don't have to square one early on, develop this 17, 18-year-old and hope for the best. So honestly, I think it's pretty dicey because these coaches, especially at the top, have a luxury that, perhaps teams in the middle of a power conference and a G5 conference, whatever, they just don't have. So it's real dicey out there.
Yeah, I also don't think it's the worst thing for true freshman quarterbacks for some of the blue chippers because these guys come in and in a lot of cases have so much pressure on them from day one. If the expectation now, given the quarterback market and the portal and NIL, is, hey, if you're a big team, you can go out and get a stopgap. You can pretty much do that at your will. If you can go out there and do that and take some of the pressure off of these true freshmen, maybe it gives them a chance to develop. Like, I'm really curious to see what does happen.
A lot of them, by the way, are leaving in the middle of their senior years of high school.
That's right.
They're trying to become adults as quickly as humanly possible and are thrust into this position of pressure when they should be, at their proms or taking high school finals, their AP test, whatever, that like Bryce Underwood should sit. But guess what? If Mikey Keene's not good for Michigan, that's on Sharon Moore.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm curious to see at Notre Dame, just as another example. I mean, they do like CJ Carr a lot. CJ Carr had an injury.
Sure.
Steve Angeli came in the playoff game, actually looked pretty good. I believe he'll be in the running for the Notre Dame starting quarterback spot. I don't think CJ Carr has any grand vision of going elsewhere. By all accounts, he's pretty happy at Notre Dame.
Yeah.
So he has had an opportunity now to learn and to heal, to recuperate with his injury. And hopefully that makes him a better quarterback for it. Even a guy like an Arch Manning, that's kind of a one-off. Arch just wanted to play for Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah.
But not having to come in day one and immediately produce for a Texas team that's always in the limelight, hopefully that does make him more than ready when the time comes next season.
Yeah. I mean, look at what Ohio State, possible national champion. We're recording this a week ahead. They have in their room all sorts of blue chip quarterbacks. And they saw a little bit of Devin Brown and Lincoln Kienholz in the bowl game, the shorthanded bowl game against Mizzou last year. They didn't seem like they were a high end answer, but then you also enter in Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan. And Ryan Day, after losing at that point 3 straight to Michigan, feeling some heat, says, I want a guy who's played college football. Yeah. I don't want to take a chance on the upside of these guys that I myself looked at and said, that is the future of Ohio State football. I now don't want to take a chance on them because my ass is on the line. And that's so he goes with Will Howard. It works out mostly really successfully. But if you're a blue chip freshman quarterback, if you're a blue chip high school quarterback, I think there has to be some sort of configuration of just like, where can I sit for a year and get better and in earnest not get portaled over? And the answer is very few places right now, that you have to be so ready and so put together and ready to roll. And I don't know, that's you're immediately being thrust into action as essentially a professional quarterback, the pressure of being an NFL quarterback, but just in college at 18 years old. Wild.
Let's go over to Facebook. Let's stay with some of these bigger picture topics.
Yeah.
Sean says the transfer portal seems to be out of control. Some players leave because they're offered more money and NIL incentives. Others leave after their first year because they didn't see the field much. And you have some players who transfer multiple times, even some going back to a school where they've been before. This is very true.
Yeah.
The impact of this has made recruiting less meaningful, and therefore there is no such thing as a, quote, solid verbal commitment anymore, only soft. Maybe I should change the podcast name. What are some solutions to this issue? How do we get these guys to commit to a program for the long term? Should players have binding contracts in FBS football? How do we prevent this sport from becoming the G League of the NFL? That is Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Yes.
Long question, Dan.
Okay. I have a pretty easy, straightforward answer.
Give it to me.
don't follow recruiting. Don't follow the portal. The only college football media that you should be consuming is the one you're consuming this very second, the Solid Verbal.
5 stars would recommend.
I would, other than the Solid Verbal, follow your team, be excited about your team, follow the big picture stuff with the sports. Don't grow attached to players. Don't get fully, ingesting the hopium with, we got a right tackle from Florida. Oh, we got a running back from Louisiana Monroe, whatever. Buy a preview magazine of your choice. Listen to the Solid Verbal previews, read Bill Connolly's previews, whatever. And the unfortunate reality is it's never made more sense to root for laundry than to be invested in the commitments or lack thereof of players. And I'm not faulting the players.
No.
They are taking advantage of a system that for a long time was dead set against them, and they're now figuring out how to best utilize more freedom. So don't blame players for portaling. Don't play this is the system that's in place. If schools and conferences and TV networks, everybody in power in the sport, were so dead set against all of this player movement, they'd set up a central structure for the sport that legislated how it should and shouldn't work. But right now, everybody loves all that money involved with everything. So We'll see if that happens at some point, but there's no easy answer beyond root for your school, root for whoever you're a fan of, and you're going to lose good players. You're going to gain players that maybe will be good and maybe will work out, and just hope for the best once the season kicks off. I don't know how, I can't tell you to care about recruiting as an obsessive. I can't at this point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I get where he's coming from. I do think the portal is out of control to some extent. I also think it's kind of necessary chaos because college football is, a $1 billion industry at this point, giving players the capacity to move, much like coaches do or have for an eternity. I think that is long overdue. And so we are just settling in, I guess, to my point from before. We still don't fully know the effects of all of this. We have strong assumptions.
Right.
To ask for guardrails, I don't think guardrails are out of the question. I don't know what they look like. I don't know if they can institute a one-time transfer rule. You get one for free. After that, you got to sit. We may be past the point of no return,
right,
on stuff like that, right? It definitely seems as if the sport has swung in a very, very drastic way towards player freedom, which again, in general, I support. It's just figuring out what is the best way to sort of navigate this new horizon, or this new situation, with more change for sure still on the horizon. My guess is as we get to a point now where NIL and colleges are more tightly aligned, which we know is coming, right?
Right.
Where NIL deals can be offered via the university and not via a third party. If there is some way perhaps to tie in NIL deals specifically to a school as opposed to a player.
Right.
Maybe then that is an incentive for keeping players around, i.e. you only get this money if you stay at the school because that is how these NIL deals are structured. I don't know if we're going to get to a point with binding contracts, to Sean's point here, just simply because, again, things have swung so aggressively in the direction of player freedom. It seems like I don't know if anyone wants to take that on. I think everybody's afraid of getting sued. So,
right. That's what's going to happen, right? If you say one
right.
free transfer and then you have to sit out for a year, you're just going to hire Tom Mars and his firm is going to do whatever Oppo research on whatever your school has been doing poorly. And suddenly the NCAA or whoever is in charge of everything is be like, all right, that you need players to have some sort of collective bargaining voice to negotiate with conferences or some future central body. And until that happens, we're not going to get binding contracts. It's just not, I don't know. It just doesn't feel like we're going to get rock solid, okay, everybody's signing 2-year deals and you can't transfer out before then. You're just going to see lawsuits. So I don't think there's any easy short-term answer until we have some sort of central college football body that has standardized contracts throughout conferences, whatever.
Yeah.
And then we can go from there. But it seems like it's not happening next week. So for now, I don't get too attached. That's all. Root for your team. Don't get too attached, and don't try to change something, or don't try to work yourself up and lose sleep over something that likely isn't changing next week.
Will says, is having that, quote, killer instinct to go for the throat and capitalize on big moments something that a coach just has or something that can be learned? As a Penn State fan, while I think James Franklin made good progress this year, I do wonder if he'll ever get better at putting away teams or capitalizing on those moments in big games that are projected to be close, i.e. when he's not favored by 7 or more, such as the ends of each half against Ohio State and Notre Dame, Dan.
Yeah.
Killer instinct.
Mm-hmm.
How do you learn killer instinct? Can you learn killer instinct?
I don't know if it's about learning. It's about, I don't know, self-awareness and figuring out what kind of coach and what kind of program you want to run. Like, I don't think anybody would accuse Kirk Ferentz in Iowa or, take whoever that's not necessarily bombing it down the field all the time, but winning a ton of games. It's the self-awareness about the kind of program you want to run or the type of offense you want to run or the defense you want to run. They're like, this is how we're going to win games. We're going to win games bombing it down the field. We're going to win games by creating a suffocating, aggressive zone defense like Iowa. And if we lose, we lose. If we win, we win. And we're going to do it in this way. Like Dan Lanning is very aggressive, and he's decided that that's how he wants to go about Oregon's business. And I think you got to pick a lane and you got to aggressively go down that lane. My problem is, I don't know what Penn State's lane is in this case. That, like, you're talking about a killer instinct from Penn State. They're very good against, again, the record against teams that they're favored by 7 or more is insane against,
like
spread, right?
Under James Franklin, it's something like 19-1-1. It's incredible.
So is it a killer instinct thing? And you would know better than I. You pay closer attention to Penn State. Just, I guess, not as close as you pay attention to Notre Dame, apparently.
Saddle, come on.
That game was incredible. Is it a killer instinct thing that James Franklin is unable to win these close games against Notre Dame and Ohio State? Or is it something else? Is it a specific way in which he chooses to manage a game? Is it a specific way in which you think his fingerprints are all over big moments? What is it about James Franklin specifically, if you put it on him?
Right.
That, like, guess what? A lot of teams lose to Notre Dame. Guess what? A lot of teams lose to Ohio State. Penn State might just be almost as good, but not quite. What is it?
Well, I mean, look, one thing that immediately comes to mind is that play that Nick Singleton dropped the touchdown pass. It was early in the second quarter against Notre Dame.
Yep.
And instead of trying to make it 7-zip, they kicked the field goal to get points on the board and made it 3-zip.
Yeah.
And so I think there is definitely some element of aggressiveness that goes along with this question. And there are key moments throughout the course of time for James Franklin where, in my opinion, he's made the wrong decision. Hindsight's 20/20. I think what we saw in that playoff game was the wrong decision. I think they should have gone for it. You and I talked about it on the stream. But that may not be the sole reason why they lost. I could list off other moments. That's neither here nor there. I do think that he did, to Will's point, make progress this season. I think Andy Kotelnicki gave them an element of creativity and aggressiveness that was sorely lacking previously. So I do think there is some bit of, yes, we need to take more chances. Yes, we need to show that we're willing to do this, in crunch time, make the big risky play. I think he did get better with that. I also think there's an element here of it's not totally on James Franklin. Yes, he's the coach, but part of it's got to be on the players. Maybe that's a preparedness thing, right? That's probably a separate conversation altogether, and that could have some of the answers to this question. But like Drew Aller did not look super prepared in that game. Either that or the moment was too big for him. It's one or the other, maybe a little bit of both. But Aller did not look good when your best players like Drew Aller are going into one of the biggest games of the season and they look that bad. That's a problem. That's a real problem. So I would definitely look at preparedness. I don't think they've had some of the same problems on defense. The defense has stood the test of time, but Penn State for sure needs to get its offense figured out against some of these better opponents. My hunch is that they need to make a change at the wide receiver position. The wide receiver room is not in a good place headed into 2025. As we're recording here, I've got an alert on my screen that there are 2 other guys that seemingly are entering the transfer portal off of the Penn State depth chart at the receiver position. So I do think there are key elements of the roster that James Franklin should improve, but at the end of the day, it may be players, it may be preparedness, and it could be a little bit of bad luck it's hard to quantify. Honestly, it's hard to put it all on one specific thing. Aggressiveness notwithstanding, I think we need to get to a point where it feels like the best players are showing the optimal version of themselves when we've got these big games before, we can feel like this has been solved.
Okay. Can we should be able to agree on a couple of things. Penn State has not come through for the most part against the biggest opponents on their schedule year in and year out. This year it was Ohio State, Notre Dame, and Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. We can agree on that.
Yeah.
We can agree that there have been a couple of offensive coordinators that have left this offense over the years under James Franklin since Joe Moorhead. There have been some underwhelming stretches of
Yes.
Mike Yurcich's time. Is it Yurcich or Yurcich? There have been under moments of Ricky Ronnie's time. Yes.
Sure.
Underwhelming moments this year, obviously highlighted by the Ohio State and Notre Dame games offensively. Does Penn State have a regular NFL starting quarterback in the James Franklin era?
No.
And I mean, Will Levis was at Penn State, but he was used as sort of like a change of pace runner. He was not a full-time starting quarterback for Penn State. Yes?
Correct.
Okay. Drew Aller, I guess, would probably have pretty high draft grades based on measurables and arm strength and everything like that, but certainly doesn't look the part of an obvious NFL starter at the moment. It's kind of on James Franklin to find quarterbacks that he can develop into an NFL caliber quarterback, and he hasn't done that, a starting quarterback. And so that's where I would put the blame. James Franklin is in charge of signing off on who Penn State's next quarterback of the future should be, in conjunction with the offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach, whatever, and coming up with a general vision for the offense with the offensive coordinator, given his past as an offensive coordinator and given his past as, an offensive mind. So if Penn State can't find that quarterback, that doesn't need to be drafted in the first round, upper 2 or 3 rounds, and shows himself to be ready a year, 2 years, 3 years into his NFL time to be an NFL starter, fine. Some of that's just bad luck. Guy can get injured, a guy can end up in a bad situation. James Franklin's been there since 2015, 2014, somewhere in there.
No.
Not a single guy is of NFL starting caliber at a huge place like Penn State. So if you're talking about killer instinct, you're probably talking about a program that has a guy who has at least that level of talent. And you're talking about Trace McSorley and Sean Clifford, now Drew Aller. I don't know who I'm forgetting here, but it's just, I guess early on it would have been Christian Hackenberg, who was drafted pretty high but didn't work out in the NFL. Like, I don't know. I kind of would start there, given how often the defenses for Penn State have been incredible.
No.
Wouldn't you?
Okay.
Is that anything there?
Well, of course. Of course it is. Of course.
So that's what I would put on James Franklin. And I would put on any coach that finds themselves in a similar position of they seem to be really good, but they lack that extra burst. What's the quarterback situation like?
We had a whole bit in our Fantasy Things draft a couple of years back about late game James Franklin and his management of games. To an extent, I think that's improved, but it's also having confidence in the guys that are out there. And if you're making the call at the goal line to kick the field goal and not try to go for 7 on some level, that's not having confidence that they can get the job done. Not having that Excelsior play,
right?
That can get you in the end zone from 2 or 3 yards out.
Now that's
frustrating stuff like that.
Notre Dame hasn't found that guy either, necessarily, unless I'm forgetting somebody.
That guy is Riley Leonard right now. He is the guy that they lean on for some of those clutch moments. But
I'm saying he is not. He's going to be drafted, but he is not that guy that I think. We'll see what his NFL career is like. That shouldn't necessarily fully define somebody in college with their NFL prospects. But I guess in the case of Penn State, not throwing the ball successfully to a receiver in the biggest game of the season is a bit of an indictment over how that quarterback and receivers and offense has been developed. But that's what has held Notre Dame back as well. They are like, all right, Notre Dame's really good. Let's see what Ian Book can do against Clemson. You're just like, Probably not a ton.
Let's go over to Dan on Instagram. He says,
Yeah.
I've seen lots of posts about Notre Dame kind of slowly, love that, kind of slowly becoming America's team. Thoughts?
Those are my thoughts. No, absolutely not.
I could tell you what I think.
Yeah. Give me the bureau report from inside the Notre Dame bubble.
I'm not doing this from inside the Notre Dame bubble. I am able to come and go as I please now.
Sure.
Marcus Freeman is disproportionately more likable than any Notre Dame coach that I can remember.
Will he be as likable with the Chicago Bears? Great question.
There is a rumor that the Bears want to talk to Marcus Freeman.
Yeah.
I don't know if he is taking that. I'd be surprised if he took that, but the NFL comes calling once in a lifetime for some. Now, if he continues on this path, there will be many more opportunities to go and coach a better team than the Bears, but it's neither here nor there. Maybe he's into it. Maybe he's not. I hope he doesn't, but who am I? I do think that Freeman is way more likable than many of his predecessors, and that stands for something. He's the face of the program. The fact that people like him, that definitely has papered over some of the hate that we know exists, that we have seen in the not so distant past, that we still see in the current. So to that end, Dan, I would say yes. To that end, people are more agnostic on Notre Dame than they have been in the past. That being said,
good choice of words there, by the way. Continue. Agnostic as it relates to.
I didn't plan that, but it's just the way it came out.
Yeah.
To that end, I read the emails, I read the tweets, I see all the comments that we get on YouTube and other places.
Join a conference.
Cowards. I hate to admit this publicly. Mm-hmm. There have been some comments that have just been, frankly, so vile with respect to Notre Dame that I had to delete them. I don't delete comments. It's not I don't care. Say whatever you want.
Yeah.
But there have been some, it's like, I don't really want this polluting the comment feed. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the delete button.
Mr. Free Speech himself, Ty Hildenbrand.
That's right. Notre Dame definitely is still a polarizing topic in our world. And I do not suspect that is going to change for any number of reasons. All right. People hate Notre Dame for all sorts of reasons. I do think some of that heat has been let out of the balloon because generally people like Marcus Freeman. But to say that they're America's team, they're not America's team. I mean, there might be a good chunk of America that did not go to Notre Dame that still roots for Notre Dame. Mm-hmm. And I think that aspect of the fan base has peeved other fan bases, that Notre Dame has such national appeal and other folks just can't understand why. Separate conversation. But America's team, are they suddenly like this darling? Either love them or you hate them. I don't think that part's ever going to change.
So, okay, I think the concept of an America's team has long passed. Like,
sure,
it was the Cowboys were America's team with the big star and the cheerleaders and the handsome all-pro quarterbacks, and also we're talking about teams that became nationally popular in an era where you couldn't watch all the games. That certain teams were just selected to be on a national network that week, and Notre Dame happens to be one of those teams. So maybe in 1993, Notre Dame was one of those teams that was considered to be America's team because they were always on TV. They were, had that national brand. Now everybody's on TV. And now in a world in which, as you mentioned, there are vile comments about every team. Any team you root for, somebody has a vile thing to say about Iowa State. Somebody has a vile thing to say about Miami or North Carolina or Boise State, whatever. That's the world. That's like the muck in which we live. So really, what is America's team in 2025 is whoever's playing against a hated SEC team, whoever's playing against Notre Dame, whoever's playing against Oregon, if you hate Oregon, and Phil Knight. That's who America's team is.
It's America's team of the week.
That's
fluid. Where we're at. Yeah.
It's the obvious underdog in terms of money, in terms of prestige, whatever. And so the idea, yes, Notre Dame has national appeal because of the history and tradition among some college football fans. Oregon has national appeal because of cool uniforms and Nike and cool offenses. Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Georgia, Florida State, Miami, all these places have national appeal because everybody can watch them and decide whether or not they like an aspect of that team. I'm curious what your answer is. Who is the most universally just liked, not rooted for, that's bad English, but who this season, which team fits the bill as the oh yeah, I'm rooting for them because I like some combination of coach, quarterback, style, geography, system, cheerleaders, whatever. Who is that team that to you checks enough interesting boxes for somebody in both Greensboro and, Eureka, California. Real place, by the way, Eureka.
This year,
Yeah,
maybe Arizona State.
that was going to be my answer. Yeah.
Maybe Arizona State. Because there is definitely some aspect to this of you want to root for them, but you don't want them to beat your team. You want them to be interesting.
They're not threatening like others. Yeah.
That's right. I think Arizona State, there might be a case for Boise State. Boise's been in that category for a while. It may be a little bit more charged right now since they're getting in over an SEC team over another power conference team. But I think generally there is goodwill towards Boise. This year, though, if you're asking me to pick, it's probably Arizona State. It's got to be.
Their quality. I know people don't love that, like Cam Scattaboo has like a big attitude about how he's the best running back. I would love for my running back to have that attitude. I think it's great. He's fun to watch. The offense was fun. Kenny Dillingham's a big personality. They were picked last and obviously won the conference. So there's that like underdog makes good quotient to ASU football this year. There's the idea of like, oh, they're in like this warm place with beautiful women. Like there's like a romanticism about like ASU as the underdog. They make the Rose Bowl against Ohio State in the 90s, and they've had fun players throughout the years. They have the rookie of the year in the NFL started his career at ASU with, a huge upset as a freshman. So I think the vibes are pretty good nationally with ASU. I just don't know how many people actually watched at least early season ASU games this year. But generally speaking, when you look across the sport, like, I think people probably really enjoyed the entertainment factor of teams like Ole Miss this year. Big offenses are fun to root for. But I don't know. There is something that's both fun and non-threatening to root for ASU unless you are a, Kansas fan or, Colorado fan or something like that in the same conference and they're good. That's probably as close to the most likable team I think we had this year, unless I'm forgetting somebody. I'm open to other answers if you want to let us know.
Yeah, write in solidverbal@gmail.com or hit us up on social media. You could probably go down a few rungs for sure at the power conference ranks, and you could find some teams that generally are likable. But I would say at the top of the top right now, just given the fact that ASU made the playoff kind of on an unlikely whim towards the end of the season, that seems to me to be an easy answer. But let me know.
You know what? Maybe Georgia Tech this year. This is what Georgia Tech did.
If you go down a few rungs, right? If we're not talking about playoff teams.
I'm not talking about playoff teams, just teams in general. Georgia Tech.
Vanderbilt, right? I mean, they kind of rise to the level they rise to the level of being like America's team of the week when they're playing in Alabama. Diego Pavia was a good story.
They gave Texas all that Texas could handle. I think it was 27-24, something like that game.
Sure.
I say Georgia Tech because they got that initial attention by beating Florida State in Ireland, right? Everybody on the game day sets picking against them, I think maybe other than McAfee. And they take Georgia to all those overtimes. So unless you are specifically a Georgia fan,
right,
why would anybody be rooting for Georgia in that moment nationally when you could have this cool story of the team that has lost so often to this juggernaut in their own state, taking them to the wire? That, I don't know, Georgia Tech feels very likable this year.
I think Nebraska is an interesting answer.
They just weren't fun to watch. So I don't know.
They weren't fun to watch.
Yeah.
But I think Nebraska, if they can beef up with their offense a little bit, and through the portal, it seems like they are. If they can get better on that side of the ball, they could be an interesting follow just because they haven't been truly good in a long time. Just got back to a bowl game for the first time in forever.
I just don't know how many people they're giving the feel goods this year.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Yeah, let us know. I'm sure we're omitting some obvious feel good story / fun entertainment team.
Like, I think Colorado's an interesting answer. I do think there's a bit of polarization.
Yes. They've sold a lot of people on the fun of Colorado football, but they've turned off a lot of people too. Yeah.
Raul says that Dabo Swinney just hired Tom Allen away from Penn State to be new defensive coordinator. He says this past offseason, Ryan Day hired Chip Kelly, James Franklin hired Andy Kotelnicki, Marcus Freeman hired Mike Denbrock. These have all been excellent hires that put their teams in position to compete for a national title. What skill set or magic juice is required to hire assistants as well as a head coach in college football? How does an AD vet a coach, especially a potentially young head coach without a track record of hiring?
Right.
For how deep their coaching network goes. This gets back to philosophy in my book.
Okay.
I think if you're hiring an assistant, obviously you don't know if it's going to work. Everyone hopes it will. Oftentimes it doesn't. So as a starting point, you got to make sure whatever philosophy you have, that coach shares as well. And we have found that these tend to be the best new marriages when you're bringing in a coach that very much subscribes to what the head guy is putting out there. That obviously puts you in a position to succeed. Though I think it definitely is interesting when somebody goes out there and tries to hire an assistant coach that is drastically different from what they've done in the past. I still feel like there is a lot of risk with that type of move. So to move incrementally away from something you were doing before in hopes of making the whole thing better, that I think if I were doing the hiring is where I would go, as opposed to just a wholesale rip it down to the studs. We're going to do a completely new offense. Like,
Right.
Didn't Cal try that with Jake Spavital? And
Yeah.
we saw a lot of the numbers go up, right? Because the Spav offense is inherently very different from what they've done in the past.
Mhm.
But I also think there are very select circumstances where a drastic change in one direction will work. I
Right.
think more often than not, it leaves you somewhat a bit exposed. And so I'm fearful when I see a situation like that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there magic juice involved with hiring assistants, Dan?
I think the magic juice is a personality fit that a lot of these times the head coach has either crossed over in some way with either the assistant they're hiring or somebody that has coached with that assistant and can lean on a referral, be like, yes, you two just seem cut from the same cloth. You two have the same like general personality and philosophy about coaching and recruiting and about practice, that usually coaches are going to hire somebody not just because like, oh, I want to run a 3-3-5, that guy runs a 3-3-5. That can happen, but generally speaking, they're going to look for that personality fit. That like, I mean, it's no different than finding a partner, finding a friend, whatever. I'm sure Kate has introduced you to a husband of one of her friends that they've come over for game night or a barbecue or something like that. And you're like, hey, he's a nice guy. We're different. I don't know. Seems a little bit weird about this. I just think we're different. Like, I don't think it's terribly different than that line of thinking, that the magic juice is going to be philosophy, both in terms of X's and O's and just personality, how you relate to players, how you relate to recruiting. Do they have experience recruiting in a region you'd like them to have experience recruiting in? So like in the case of Penn State and their new hire, like in an ideal world, James Franklin would hire somebody with experience and connections in Detroit, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, places that Penn State has a recruiting footprint. So I think that's part of the magic juice, whoever he ends up hiring. If that person has experience as a GA or a position coach at Penn State 10, 12 years ago, that's not the worst thing in the world in terms of concocting a magic juice cocktail, whatever. So James Franklin, just like any other successful head coach who has been successful in hiring assistants and coordinators, has a list and has had a list for the last 3-4 years of promising up-and-coming position coaches, GAs, coordinators. And
Right.
so this kind of move from Tom Allen in this specific case, because we can agree that James Franklin is a very good coach, will not catch him completely off guard. That James Franklin has a network of coaches that have passed through or that he has, visited and, grown to respect. And that's the magic juice, is caring over the years about the future of your program if something unforeseen should happen. And so whoever Penn State hires, and I saw a list that was like Aaron Henry from Illinois, Tim Banks from Tennessee, because Banks was at Penn State for a while.
Yeah.
That seems like it's part of a magic, had a very good defense at Tennessee this year.
Yeah.
Who else did I see on that list? The guy from Indiana has recruited and coached very well, and obviously this year in the Big Ten. There's no magic juice. There's just 3-4 elements that should check boxes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it helps if there's some familiarity.
Yeah.
Between the assistant coach and the place he is going to next. That's helpful. I like that setup as well. And
Tom Allen knows Big Ten offenses, right? From the past few years at Indiana. Makes sense.
And so we read a little bit on why Tom Allen might be leaving at this time. I mean, it sounds like it's maybe to be closer to his daughters who are in the Carolina area.
Sure.
It also wouldn't surprise me to see Penn State promote from within
Definitely.
I know they think highly of a guy like an Anthony Poindexter. Dan Connor has definitely had his name rise just in his brief time on the staff as well. So they have options if you're James Franklin. Also, while we're on the air here, it's not just Drew Aller who's going to be sticking around. It's both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton coming back for their senior season. So Penn State stands to be in a really, really good spot, at least in that backfield. We'll see what happens out wide. They've got to make some changes out there.
Tyler
to beef
Warren
up the
done.
passing game. Tyler Warren done. Tyler Warren's going to be a mid-first round pick, I think. But suffice to say, they should have a pretty good offense just with what they've got coming back now. The defense is always there for Notre Dame, or for Penn State as well, and maybe Notre Dame in this new era. It's just going to be a question of who is Penn State going to bring on to run that defense. We'll see.
Next question. Anything about pre-ferments? Anything like that? No?
Oh, we've got a bunch of non-college football, as we always do.
Oh, yeah. Keep going.
Why don't we save some of these questions for our Patreon bonus episode? I think we've got more than enough.
Where can people find
that
episode, though?
People can find that episode at verballers.com. We'll drop that out on the feed, on the private feed on, let's say, Thursday.
Okay.
As part of our bonus episode for this week. But in the interim, let's take one more from the public here, Dan.
Is Thursday when we're running our Hawk Tua interview? Or is that... No? That's next week?
We're not going anywhere near that, man.
What?
Yeah, we're not going anywhere near that.
That's on the top of your list for this year, for 2025.
Is it?
Hawk Tua.
I think you might have put that on the list. I didn't put that on the list.
Oh, no, Ty. I got paragraphs that you've written here. Continue.
Brian wants to know, how in the world does Riley Leonard keep winning games? Thematic.
You take it. You tell me.
When Notre Dame first got Riley Leonard, I was not crazy about the move. And I think I came on the air with you and I said as much. I'm just not crazy about the move. I did not trust him as a passer. I trusted him very much as a playmaker, as an improviser. But at the time, he was coming off an ankle thing, and I had gotten heart palps when they played Notre Dame and almost beat Notre Dame. Notre Dame needed Sam Hartman to run in order to win that game. So it was clear that Riley Leonard had a little bit of those intangibles in his game.
Right.
But what we have seen over the course of this season is an offense that's heavily reliant on the run, heavily reliant on its defense. And the passing game has been good in spots, but it is definitely not the kind of thing that, as a Notre Dame fan, I want them to lean on in order to win games. But what they have been able to lean on pretty consistently is Riley Leonard and his playmaking on the ground.
Yeah.
He got a question in the build-up to that Orange Bowl. Somebody asked him, why are you so hard to tackle? And he basically shrugged and said, I don't know. I'm not that fast. I don't have great moves. He's a big guy who can move. Definitely is tough to bring down, but there is just sort of an unknown quantity to his game, something that you can't put a finger on, that he always finds a way to come through in the clutch, avoid a sack, and make a throw down the field.
Yeah.
He always finds a way to run for 8.5 yards when you need 8. And it's just that constant ability to know where he's at on the field, to run for the sticks, to pump fake somebody, to extend a drive. I don't know how you teach that. I don't think that's going to make him a first round pick in the NFL. It might not even make him a day 2 pick in the NFL. But he definitely has something in his game that I tweeted this out, or was about to tweet this out, I think in the aftermath of the Orange Bowl, where you kind of feel like you want to induct him immediately into the pain in the ass Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
He's just a pain in the ass out there. And he's the type of guy, if he's on your team, you love him. If he's not, you say, man, he's a pain in the ass. I just don't know how to stop him. I don't know how to bring him down. The easiest way to stop him is to have fast defenders who can spy him and then force him to try and beat you through the air, which I'm not totally confident he can do. But thus far, the formula that they have been going with here all season long and now throughout the course of the playoffs has been, we lean on Riley when we need a clutch play, and more often than not, he's going to come through. I don't think that answers Brian's question. It certainly doesn't answer the question for me, but there is whatever that pixie dust is with Riley Leonard and how he plays. They're able to lean on it. They're able to go to the well for more of it whenever they need it. And that's how they continue to lean on him and find him winning games for him.
I mean, the vile commenters that you referenced earlier would reference the Purdue defense, the Miami of Ohio defense, the Stanford defense, the Georgia Tech defense, the Navy defense, the Virginia defense, the USC defense. I don't know how to properly explain Riley Leonard, but I will say you probably weren't wrong about Riley Leonard.
I don't think I was wrong.
By far the worst explosive passing game of any of the playoff teams this year.
No, I was leery about that. I was leery about that because obviously there is an element to his game that is a lot of fun to watch. Mm-hmm. And you cannot put him neatly into any one box. He's not a prototypical anything. He's an improviser. That is what he's good at.
He stacks first downs.
That is what Mike Denbrock is now leaning on when he is calling this offense.
Yeah.
They are able to do it repeatably, which I think is important, obviously. So they're able to get these plays from him on an ongoing basis. It just doesn't always look as pretty as you would expect.
Right.
He just finds a way to get it done. How does he do that? How does he continue to lead them to victory? He's just been making big plays when he has to. They're able to get the most out of him to get to the sticks, and they're perfectly content playing a very conservative brand of football, especially in the postseason, to get there, to get to the next round.
I mean, and we see this in a lot of different team sports. He's kind of a specialist. That he's a middle reliever who just, he has a funky delivery and gets nothing but ground balls, right?
Yeah.
He's not throwing 98. He doesn't have a huge hook, slider, curveball, whatever. He gets ground balls. He can give you an inning and a half, or I guess an inning and 2/3, whatever, and has a 1.92 ERA, doesn't strike anybody out, doesn't do anything flashy, isn't an all-star, gets ground balls. Oh, this power forward is averaging 3 points a game and 19 rebounds when he, per 36 minutes. He serves a purpose that's super valuable. And that Riley Leonard is Mr. First Down. And that's how Notre Dame keeps winning games against low teams, against mediocre teams, against good teams. That somehow, some way, Riley Leonard gets across the unofficial TV yellow line. That's how they win.
If he were a pitcher, I think it's a perfect comparison to say he's a pitcher with a 3.1 ERA who has 18 wins a year.
Okay.
Strikes out 100 guys a year.
Yeah. I mean, wins are not indicative of quality. We know. Continue.
But that's sort of the point.
Yeah.
That's the kind of player he is. And you know what? Notre Dame will take it. They're in the national championship.
Yeah, I think the distinction, too, would be like, given Notre Dame's success, he has a 3.81 ERA, and he's made, $244 million in his career? He's just out there and available for first downs, right? Yeah. This guy is able to start 30 games a year. He takes care of himself. He hits the cold tub. There's the availability of first downs for Riley Leonard. Will it work against Ohio State? Yeah, I think that's a tall ask. I think it's a tall ask in this moment. We're doing our preview later in this week. But Notre Dame getting this far, I don't know. You can't look at this season, and Riley Leonard is anything but an overwhelming success.
Huge.
In the context of Notre Dame's recent history.
Why don't we leave it there? The second half of this episode can be found out on our Patreon later this week. We'll drop it to the feed early on Thursday morning. Verballers.com is how you sign up for that. While you're out there, why not check out Bowl Bingo? Bowl Bingo is free for all. You do not need to sign up for any paid tier in order to play the game. You just go to playbowlbingo.com. You got one card left. We gave out a $250 Amazon gift card to the person that won it in week 2. We're about to announce what we're going to give away as part of our week 3 prize.
Yep.
And of course, we've got the week 4 national championship card that's going to drop later today, early tomorrow. For anyone listening to this episode, you'll have an opportunity. All you got to do is pick 6 things that you think are going to happen. Get in on the game. No frills. Pretty straightforward.
I recommend it. Yeah.
That's all we got, Dan. All right. Second half of this is coming your way again out at verballers.com. In the interim, though, for myself, Ty Hilden, for that.
That's good.
Ty Hilden Brandt, for that guy over there, Dan Rubenstein. We will talk to you all a little bit later this week and do our national championship preview. Stay solid.
Peace.